Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of What's Next with We. Uh, this episode is part of the innovation series, wherein we get industry experts to speak about different topics, where we understand trends and patterns, gather insights and nuances, and try to kind of connect the dots between the various topics. We have a really special guest today, a dear friend and my neighbor, Dr. Hemang Shah. Hemang, welcome.
Vishal, thanks for having me.
Great, Hemang. Today, we're actually kind of going to discuss on design thinking for startups, an interesting topic. Hemang is an expert. He has uh, worked with a bunch of startups in this space and helped them kind of have that mindset. Uh, Hemang is, very influential in the tech and an IP professional as well. He has his own podcast on innovation, sports, and life. You guys have to listen to it. I'll have the link in my description. He's very active on LinkedIn. He writes about innovation and strategy and gives some actionable insights out there. I'm the V in What's Next with V. I'm Vishal Ramaswamy, your host. Jumping right in, Hemang, would be great to hear your story till date. I guess you studied in India, then went to the US for your master's, PhD, have been working in tech, have patents in your name. So would be great to hear your story till date, Hemang.
Uh, Thanks, Vishal, and thanks for the opportunity to go down the memory lane. I'll try not to make this sound too laborious, but like a lot of the students, I got my undergraduate degree, in India from the University of Mumbai, and then I proceeded to the US to actually work on my master's, and the doctorate just happened because I met a professor and he introduced me to this amazing world, which combined material science with optics, with electronics engineering. And I realized that, okay, if I just leave after my master's, I'll only probably touch the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole lot of information to know and truly internalize. So I stayed on for a doctorate, and I still don't think I've achieved or I've learned more than the tip of the iceberg. It's such a vast domain out there. And after my doctorate, I proceeded to work in the tech industry. And there are some interesting themes which, reflecting back, are now clear, that I've somehow found myself at the intersection of various disciplines. So whether it's merging tech with intellectual property, it's a technical, legal plus business intersection, or like my research work was, which combined different areas in the fields of engineering, or what I'm doing these days, which is working with startups that are primarily in the IoT space, working on a lot of mentorship programs, and then kind of guiding them on intellectual property. So somehow it's been a few of these themes that I've come across. Like I look at it as a bridge between various domains, and oftentimes it's been either through work or through some of my desire to be there. It's working on innovative, cutting edge products. So that's been an amazing experience to be a part of. And what I do these days is at least the learnings which I have, what's shareable, I try to inform as many people as I can.
Awesome, Hemang. I think quite an interesting journey. I think you have the intersection of subject matter expertise at the same time functions, right? From technology, business, legal. So coming towards the topic of today's podcast is design thinking for startups. I think no better person than you, since you have seen multidisciplines, and design thinking requires that to understand the problem, go into the root cause, and kind of solving for your customer. So it would be great to hear your thoughts on design thinking for startups. And do founders need it at the beginning? I mean, I'm talking about startup founders. Is it a mindset? Is it a process? So it would be good to hear your views on design thinking.
So design thinking to me is a framework that can be applied to any area. So I've applied it for my individual goals. I've applied it, for, let's say, if I want to work on a product feature, or if I have to even analyze certain industries. I also want to clarify that it's a framework wherein every one of us has used pieces of that. So very simply, the most common design thinking framework has 5 stages. The first one is empathize, where you try to understand who your customer is, you try to understand their pain points. Then you move on to the next stage where you define a problem based on the trends, based on the problems that you have identified. But you identify one core problem to solve. After that, you get into the ideation stage because you want to solve that problem and you want to throw a volume of solutions at it. Now, from those volume of solutions, you pick one or at best two paths. So that is your prototyping phase, wherein you take one or two of these solutions and you try to create quick, dirty, cheap, experiments that kind of show that, okay, does this solve my problem or not? And after you're sort of happy because you'll be iterating a few times over there, you get into the test phase. And the testing phase is where you try to get advanced customer feedback. So before you get into mass production, you try to get some early feedback. So this is the 5-stage framework. And I guarantee none of these steps individually are unknown, right? We all know and we've tried various things every now and then. The beauty about design thinking as a framework is that it really works if you follow it from an end-to-end perspective. Like far too often, we jump into just one thing. Like we love to get into brainstorming. Everyone loves that, right? Pick a problem you want to solve. You want to get to a team, do whiteboarding sessions and all that. And that sounds productive, but it's not, because unless you've done the core customer problem identification, unless and until you really have a pulse of what the customer's pain is, your solutions, although fun, they may not be effective. So coming to your question on what should startups do and is it a mindset? So innovation, I think, has to be one of the core principles. And I think startups start with that fundamental premise. And because they're unhappy with what they see in the market today, they're like, hey, what exists doesn't really solve the problem that we are after. Or if it solves, it's done in a very inefficient way. So startups do start with that mindset. What may happen over time is as they scale up and as they start doing their beta launches and they start earning revenue or get into fundraising, there's plenty of distraction which comes about. And so in the rush to execute, in the rush to, let's say, gain market share and all that, sometimes you may lose sight of, okay, hey, what are we really doing? So I think that coming back, and this could be like a quarterly reminder that, hey, what's the true pain point and where are we on that? Like, what's your compass, and do you have that as a company?
Got it, Hemang. I think you use a very interesting word, compass, right? I think this framework gives a direction to startup founders, because initially when a startup is kind of built, everybody focus on the solution, which may not be the right solution for the customer. So I think it's a right compass. You come, as you said, I think on a quarterly basis to check whether you are in that path. Following up, Hemang, just wanted to check, you had mentioned obviously the framework, the 5-step process. Can this be applied to all kind of startups, or is it going to be only B2B or B2C?
Sorry, any startup can do it, or any company, any person, any entity, organization can use design thinking. In that sense, it's just an amazing framework. It really applies to every domain. Yes, what you do have to do is customize some of the elements, right? So for example, I think you were asking about what a B2B startup is versus a B2C startup. A customer is very different for each of those folks, because in one it could be a consumer, an end consumer. So who's the end consumer? I think you have to really define that, and you have to understand what their pain is. And a business might sound an easier problem to tackle, but at the same time, it can be hard to get a glimpse into the exact pain points of a business unless and until you've worked in it, or you have people who are like, hey, please, you're welcome to analyze us, you're welcome to watch us, and thereby draw your own inferences, and please solve it for us. To get to that point can be a bit challenging for startups.
Got it, Hemang. If you have few case studies, maybe in different fields, since you have worked in different sectors and functions, Would be good to hear what the startups that you have worked with, how they have been able to implement design thinking.
So I can't say for sure if they have used this design thinking framework formally, but looking back at the products which they have which they are innovating on and which they are developing, I can give a couple of examples, and I've seen these companies sort of firsthand. So one company I'd like to name is called Adivo Diagnostics, and I like that company. They are based out of Chennai. What they do is they look at wounds and how wounds progress. Now, typically, when you have, let's say, any wound, and to determine if it's progressing or regressing, you have to do like a culture analysis, and that's a time-consuming process. And even more so in say remote areas or in rural areas, that from the time that analysis is taken to when the doctor is available to see the thing, you can have a fairly large amount of time which can elapse, ranging from, let's say, a day to a few days. Now, Adivo, their USP is their AI algorithms, which analyze the wounds, and so they came up with this imaging device that can look at that can take snapshots on which their algorithms run, and I guess they are really compressing the time to a few hours from when those pictures are taken to when the doctor is available to interact with the patient. So if I look at it from a design thinking framework, they really identify what the pain point is. Like it's not the lack of, say, the ability to do testing or or a lack of a medical profession. I think those are there. The problem that they went after is that, hey, this is taking way too much time than expected.
True.
And here, they came up with, and of course, on the tech side, they're like, hey, maybe there's a way that we can apply some of our image analysis, to fast track some of these things, and maybe it can get you. I'm not sure if it's a definitive thing that, say, they could provide, but at least it gives you like an indication of where things are. So it could be a supplementary tool to a doctor. So you'll find plenty of examples like these. And what's the true pain point that you're trying to solve? Then you pick one problem to attack. You solve it through various ways, and they are iterating their products. So it's one of the really amazing, impactful companies that I've come across.
Awesome, Hemang. I think very interesting solution. I think what they have done really well is identifying the customer and then really finding the root cause of what exactly the problem is, and then obviously iterating on the solutions to get it right. So I think in medical side, you have a lot of these companies now in India building these interesting AI solutions, at the same time, even devices and affordable devices solving. I've seen a bunch of startups in the Indian ecosystem now. I think medtech is a very good place to do a lot of innovation. Coming to my next question, Hemang, I mean, since you're an expert in IP, you have patents in your name as well. Would be good to hear your thoughts on how design thinking could be used, obviously in startups, and also have that IP kind of mindset internally especially for the founding team. It would be good to hear your thoughts on this.
So I'll go back to the fundamental premise of how a startup was found, right? Wherein that unhappiness with the current state of affairs,
True.
With regards to a product or a service, and like, hey, our approach, our unique way of observing it is going to make things better. So with that basic premise, you're going to have innovations. You're going to have a new way of doing things. So either you'll be creating new products, things that have not existed before, or you'll come up with interesting approaches to solve the same problem, but make it better. Like you'll be improving certain metrics. So regardless of whichever lens you look at it, there's going to be plenty of innovations which will come out. What also tends to happen is, and you'll hear these numbers thrown out loosely, which is like 95% startups fail or they pivot, like stuff like that. And it does happen, right? That as every company starts, they may see that, hey, there's a different market that we can address.
True.
So we'll migrate to that. So what happens to the innovations that they have already created, like when they first set out? to me, that is like leaving money on the table, right? Meaning those innovations, although you have changed your focus to something else, if they had, let's say, registered for IP rights on those are assets which a startup or any company is creating. And those assets can generate further business opportunities. There's various ways to do that. And coming to design thinking, so it's one of the ways in which you can approach innovation. So whether you use that formally or whether you use any other approach, like you may not call it design thinking. You may just do it like, hey, as a team, we're going to have this problem solving, session or something. Whatever comes out of that, that is sort of like your idea bank. Right? Ideas that you can further act upon. Some will be cooked, some will be, half-baked solutions out there. And anytime you think that you've hit across something that's an interesting way, nothing like that has been done before, to whatever your awareness is, I think a company should have a system for sort of taking those idea banks and converting a few of those into potential IP rights that they can register. Now that requires sort of an IP culture also. Like it just doesn't happen like that.
True.
And in my opinion, I think that has to come from the founding team. It says that, hey, we are believing in this thing. And the examples that I've seen, the founding teams which have this culture, they tend to do really well. They tend to be further resilient. And IP has future benefits also. It's one of the ways in which the people who work at that company, they also feel that we are contributing to some really innovative products and services. It has a whole lot of these second order benefits that go beyond to what that business is doing.
Awesome, Hemang. I think clear message to founders out there that I think people who are setting up their startups, could be in any sector, any field. I think they should look at the innovations that are happening internally, create a system, and then kind of look at commercializing those assets. It could be, I think, hardware and software, if I'm right, Hemang? Can be both.
It could be both. There's multiple ways to do it.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a whole lot of references. There's a whole lot of people like us. IP facilitators are there in the country, so you don't have to solve these problems on your own. And Shah, if you like, I can send you a link to like a free course that startups could do. It's
awesome.
It's like a reference guide that was written just for startups and CTOs, right? To make sure that that they know how to learn to protect and identify and secure their innovations.
Great, Hemang. If you can share that, I'm happy to put it in the description for the listeners. Hemang, going to my last question, and the theme of my podcast is what's next, right? So what's next in the space? Though design thinking is a framework, it may or may not change in terms of those 4 or 5 steps that you mentioned. What do you think, according to you, how this framework or this mindset would evolve?
One of the areas where I see is that, this could be like an assumption that innovation is only to be done by a certain set of people. That, for example, only the product team can think of innovations. I don't think that's true. I think in terms of that permeation, design thinking and other innovation frameworks can be done by anyone. Like you could even, let's say, involve the facilities team, right? Because how you work on a day-to-day basis does have significant impact, like on the kind of work that you produce. Like so it's not like limited to only the chosen few. It should be done by each and every one. That's one broad area where I think change is required. And the other thing I just see is that it's not a one-time thing only. Like you don't do, let's say, a brainstorming session or an innovation session like in a quarter and hope that magic will happen. This is one of those areas where you have to continually keep on doing it. You have to be at it. That's how the culture the culture spreads. That's how things happen over time, because one session is not going to do it for anyone. It requires multiple iterations at it for it to work also. So these are two broad areas. Innovation, is for all, and second, you need to continually keep at it.
Great points, Hemang. I mean, easy points. It sounds quite easy, like the way you said it, that innovation is for all. Design thinking mindset should be from the facilities team to the founding team, as you mentioned. And and I think, as you said, it has to be on a daily basis. Like it should be involved on a continuous basis. I think without that, if you don't have that rigor on a continual basis, it might just lose steam as we go, because startups journey generally is quite up and down in nature. But if you have these frameworks and foundation at the beginning, I think the startup is bound for success. Hemang, on that note, thanks a lot for taking out time. It's been, I think, a short, but I think heavy impact, heavy message, a lot of insights for founders on this podcast. Thanks, Hemang, once again. Been pleasure having you in this on this.
Thanks so much, Vishal. I mean, you're doing great work, and I love the insights that you're able to extract from everyone.
Great,
So
Hemang.
thank you so much, and keep doing what you're doing. Looking
Awesome.
forward to the next We Things.
Great, Hemang. Thanks a lot. I will be sharing Hemang's podcast as well. He's also quite active in the podcast space, and the other link to learning about IP. So I'll be sharing that also in the comment section. Once again, Hemang, thanks a lot. Have a good one, guys.